The noun technique involves listing all the nouns that come up in discussions or documents about the requirements. So the list can become quite long because many of these nouns are actually attribute. So an attribute describes one piece of information about each instance of the class. For example, customer has first name, last name, and phone number. So these are the attributes of the customer. So most information systems store and use pieces of information about each thing of interest as shown in this table. So the specific pieces of information are called attributes. So these are the attributes of a customer. It has an ID. An ID should be unique, and the system's also going to store the name, the phone number, home number of the customer. These are all important information about the customers. So each of these detail again is an attribute. So as you refine your list of nouns, you may redefine many nouns as attributes rather than the fundamental things. So the analyst needs to identify all the attributes of each thing that the system needs to store, even if they turn up on the initial list of nouns. So one attributes may be used to identify specific needs or specific thing, such as the social security number for an employee or an order number for each purchase. So the attributes that uniquely identify the thing is called an identifier or key. So sometimes the identifier is already established, such as the social security number. For example, again, for an employee has a social security number, say SSS number, or for an order or a product, there is a product ID number. So an attribute anyway is one attribute uniquely identifies an instance of the class. So it is required for data entities, optional for domain classes. So again, sometimes the identifier is already established, like the SSS number, or sometimes the system needs to assign a specific identifier. So for example, a transaction number. So an identifier, again, you need to remember that it is unique. So for example, for an employee, every employee has their own social security number, but they cannot have the same social security number. So the same with the product. Each product should have a unique number, and all the products should have different ID number. It cannot be duplicated. So they cannot share the same number. So that is why it should be unique, because the number here, or the data here, is the one that will identify the employees uniquely. For example, in regard for this example, because there could be employees that have the same name, there could be a lot of that. So how are you going to identify each employee? So we can use their SSS number, because even if they have the same name, but they cannot have the same social security number. A system may also need to remember many similar attributes. So, for example, a customer has several names. What I mean by that is that the customer has a first name, middle name, and last name, and also possibly a nickname. So a compound attribute is an attribute that contains a collection of related attributes. So that the so an analyst may choose one compound attribute to represent all these names. So perhaps naming it um, customer full name. So instead of identifying each attribute, such as this first name, middle name, last name, the analyst can give a term for that, since this is a compound attribute, into one attribute, such as full name of the customer. So a compound attribute is a two or more attributes combined into one structure to simplify the model. So also example are the address, rather than including number, street, city, state, or zip separately. And sometimes an identifier or key is a compound attribute. So that could also be possible.